106 or 7 episodes in on stpcatalyst.com in our venture section, and we do dig in pretty deep with the startups. We come at it from an investor's point of view, and so we ask questions about the product, about the person, about the journey, about the product market fit, cost of customer acquisition. So it's basically going to be like college final exams here all in 1 hour. But to get started, for those not familiar with the platform, Spontively, let's talk about the basics.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Joe. So we're essentially Google Analytics for community, right? A lot of companies use different tools, and I think we guys, I'll take a step back and define community. Like for us, when we say community, it's, the definition is a group of people that reside and have a common sense of belonging, right? And this could be social tools, for example, your Facebook groups. These communities reside everywhere, right? From online tools to forums. And what has happened is that these tools have become decentralized as time goes by and defragmented. And what we saw as an opportunity is that, these communities, companies are building these communities and don't have insights on their communities. So it can be from social to email campaigns on MailChimp to Slack. All these are great individually, but there's no data. And this is really important. So we're essentially Google Analytics. So think of our platform as every single tech stack that you have as an organization, you connect to it, and we provide analytics on those tech stacks.
That's wonderful. And so analytics has some very specific sort of stats that it delivers. When it comes to community, those are more interactive or transactional stats. You're talking about community stats and stats. So obviously you need the visits and you need the time on and all that sort of thing. But what additional layer of sort of insight do you try to bring from a community perspective?
So those are great, surface level analytics. What's really important for an organization building community is around engagement, right? And I think, Marissa, you've highlighted a lot of those analytic points on a couple of those points.
For sure. I think one thing that's really important to remember too, it's what was, at the end of the day, you're hosting all these programs and events, right? But the question really is, what's your return on those events that you hosted? And if you want to pinpoint any individual one event, you're not going to be able to showcase ROI on one specific event. But as a community builder, as a community manager, that those events as a whole, they do have value. So what we noticed was that a lot of community managers had a hard time proving, and events is one example, but there's also, there's customer support, there's social media efforts. All of those efforts require time and investment on the company's part, but community managers have a very hard time advocating for themselves when it comes to actually showcasing the value. So that additional layer that we provide is okay, what actually was the ROI on this? What sale came out of that event that you generated or that social campaign that you ran? So we connect all of those dots.
Yeah. And Marissa tackles it from a grassroots community initiative. I come from a sales background. So purely from a sales perspective, marketing and sales, we've always butted heads, right? Marketing would be I ran a social media campaign, I did these events, and this is what led to your sales funnel. And the sales folks would be those are crappy leads. What are you talking about, right? So with our platform now, you can actually connect the dots. If your community strategies are around marketing and sales, I can be hey, Anthony attended this event, retweeted about it, mentioned it on Slack. You should really focus on Anthony because he runs a company, those type of analytics, so retention, engagement, and ROI, basically.
Yeah. And that brings me to a question I'm really interested to hear the answer to. But before that, I just want to step back so we understand at a very basic level. So they're monitoring. This is something that the consumer from the company never sees. The people who are managing the community from within the company, looking out at their customer base, this connects all that data for them and for their intelligence. So this is not something that the consumer sees. And you bring up the point of starting to identify super users, which are a weird kind of sort of internal influencer essentially for companies, and they can give you not only they can amplify your message, but they also give you really important data from your heaviest users. So how are you? I'm assuming a lot of companies aren't really comfortable or don't have a lot of experience with this concept. So how are you introducing or bringing the concept of the super user to companies?
There's a lot of education that's happening, and that's why we want to be the forefront around this. It's very similar to 10, 15 years ago when someone would say, I'm a social media manager. What's that? right? What's a social media manager? And this is kind of like an evolutionary trend that's happening right now. Social media manager and going to community, it's the same concept. It's like, but the education piece around community is very lacking, and we see a gap there, and we want to be centered around the education piece around community for organization and see the value of it. During the pandemic, there was a lot of, community became the buzzword, and a lot of, investors were like, yeah, community. And what we found was that companies were, told to go build community, but they didn't have a concept or grasp an idea around what community was about. And they were left holding the bag, basically, right? So there's an education piece that's there that's definitely lacking that we're going to be addressing for sure.
Okay. And this sort of is in the same flavor as omni-channel kind of thing that retail has. And certainly through different channels, there's different consumer behavior. The people who are on the website versus the people who are opening their mail for direct mail, or the people that are coming to events. So, what do you feel like the insights garnered from Spontively can help cross those people over and truly make them a community, even though they're coming at it from different ways?
That one, I think, boils down to, we actually built a community model because what you identified is very accurate. So one of the first problems that we tried to tackle, community managers came to us and they said, okay, I have this massive audience and different people are engaging with me in different ways, and I don't know how to segment people. Because people want to be engaged with typically in the way that they are engaging with you, right? That's the reciprocity that they expect. And so what we did was we built out this custom community model that essentially outlined specific points of engagement. And we said, all right, so on the outskirts, you have people who are just going to lurk. You have people who are just going to view your posts, but they're not necessarily giving you two-way feedback. That's one bucket. And then you have another bucket of people who are, they're clicking through your emails, so you're getting a little bit of feedback, but they haven't actually pushed a message to you yet. So that's another segment of people. So we essentially built out this community model that maps out the different engagement points. We baked that into the tool so that community managers can say, okay, well, 80% of my following actually does reside in lurking, but if I start pushing out blog content, they respond better to that, and I can get more engagement that way. So we really help map out those specific, tangible points for them.
That's great. And that starts to lean into understanding the funnel, right? So different sections of awareness and all the way down to the actual close. Yeah. One of the companies that's sort of in, again, the same genre of what you're doing that has done well with the different layers of the funnel is HubSpot. So can you talk a little bit about how you play the different layers of the funnel, and then maybe use that to juxtapose what you're doing to what HubSpot does?
Yeah, HubSpot is great on the marketing and sales side. They're a CRM tool in the crux of it, right? But there's still that gap between marketing and sales around the community on the engagement side. That's really where this is going towards, right? As we go into this decentralization model, organizations are going to be, they have a challenge already, and it's going to be even more worse when we go into this model. So for us, where we see it in terms of data and analytics and how we play ourselves, is that we're a data company. Right. So whatever strategy you're using for community, whether it's marketing, whether it's in sales, whether it's customer support or customer innovation, our platform can reside on top of those tech stacks and give you the data. What's interesting, Joe, is that it's not the lack of analytics, which is we have so much data that's there, right? It's how do you take that data and really shape it so that companies understand and can make informed decisions. So I've got Joe that's sitting on Slack, who's retweeted about me, who's did multiple direct messages on Slack. You can actually create that brand influencer or that super user that you're mentioning from those type of analytics and say, okay, look, this is the ROI on my community. When a VP would ask, you ran this event, what's my ROI? What's my bottom line on this, right? You can't do that, right? But we can tell you what the ROI on this community is and how that transforms into a potential sale, even, right? From the sales and marketing side. And what's really fascinating is that this is not a new concept. Community, the companies that have built community have really leveraged it quite well. If you look at Salesforce. Salesforce built out a community of subject matter experts, and when you wanted to, provide feedback, they'd run these events and they'd bring these subject matter experts, and that was their community, right? Lululemon, for example. Lululemon is a product, and they also have a brick and mortar store. But what's really interesting is that every single store that they open is really ingrained in the community that's there, right? They have programs, they have work with the moms, they have all this initiative that's not just around the product. And as consumers, we don't buy products the way we used to, right? It's not just for the sake of buying. It's everything that's tangible on it. Like this water bottle that we have, 10% of it gets donated back to a cause. It's a B Corp. Like those are the things that matter to consumers now, right? And when you're building a product, that's what really matters. It's the building the brand loyalty and the engagement. How do you measure that? Right?
Yeah, and is it safe to say it's hard to build a community, a company now without community?
Absolutely.
And obviously, cross-pollination of different touch points is always, you lose efficiency when you're doing that, but attribution has always been the holy grail of so many of these disconnected ways to reach out and be able to figure out what the ROI is. You mentioned the word decentralized. We're moving towards a decentralized sort of existence. Can you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, we saw it, like, Marissa and I saw it in the States during the pandemic, right? Where everybody went remote and everybody went on Zoom. So when we first started, we were actually a university spin-off. So when we first started this, we launched a platform at the university trying to help their international students to be connected to the campus community. And when the pandemic happened, the departments were like, we need data because we lost zero visibility, right? And as we go into to Web3, and as we go into the next evolution of the web, this is what's happening. We're going to that decentralization model, and it's great, but that really leaves a huge gap with organizations to make informed decisions. And that's where we see an opportunity for us to become the Google of communities, because they're all building communities, right? Whether it's a customer community, whether it's a student group, whether it's employees, right? Now we're in a hybrid workforce, right? That engagement is valuable, right? For your employees that are in, let's say, in New York versus Tampa. Right. How do you build engagement? How do you measure that? Right.
That's where like that Web3 piece I feel really comes in. Like Web3 and what's going to be the new internet is all powered by community. And so we're huge advocates for decentralization. Decentralization is great, but where do you make tangible business decisions? Where do you pool all this information together if there is no way to do that, if everything truly is decentralized? So it's great that everything's becoming decentralized, but I think the need is only getting greater for systems like this. Because at the end of the day, businesses still have to make decisions that are informed.
And that brings me to sort of maybe the technical aspects of the integration. So obviously a lot of the big guys don't play well together. Google doesn't index Facebook, or Twitter doesn't allow Google access and things like that. And then as we move into more decentralized Web3 based things, privacy and privacy tokens and identities are going to be more protected. So how do you see the sledding ahead when it comes to really being able to integrate with all pieces of a company's touch points?
Yeah, it is challenging. That's why we looked at strategic partners. So we took an investment from LOI Ventures, who's Hootsuite. Ryan Holmes is the founder of Hootsuite. We took investment from Mark Cuban and really streamlined that process. And we have a proprietary tech that we're releasing right now that, regardless of what platform you use, within 2 business days that we can integrate into and gain the data analytics. But it is challenging in terms of getting those API endpoints, but it's getting better. And what's interesting is that companies understand that this is also a potential growth engine for them as well.
Well, that's a perfect time so we can get some applause on the microphone, because these guys oversubscribed their round. And anytime best feeling in the world, I would imagine, or one of the top best feelings in the world. So let's talk about that, the journey to raise and celebrate the success.
Like it was a really difficult journey for us. We closed our pre-seed round at 1.2 million in December, and we quickly went into a fundraising round, a bridge round, as the economy kind of shifted. But it was challenging because one, Marissa and I are not your typical founders, really, right? We're underrepresented in our community across the board, right? And that's the thing. Like, it was really challenging for us. We don't come from an Ivy League, school background from Canada, but we really knew what the problem is, and I think that's where a lot of entrepreneurs ask, like, hey, how did you raise money? Well, network, hard work. There's nobody that, for us it was like we had to prepare every single day. Going into the conversation, like, we did due diligence on our investors. We strategically talked to people and we worked our butts off, right? And the no's became yeses, and it started trickling in. And that led to an investment from Hootsuite, from LOI Ventures, Hootsuite, from Mark Cuban, Apex Ventures, and Tampa Bay Ventures even, and all these folks backed us because we stayed true to our mission. And really, when we went into these meetings, we backed it by our numbers. We were like, okay, great. Like, we have revenue, we have a 900 customer waiting list, we have 100 customers, and we just hit them with the numbers. Because we're not former founders, we're not from Harvard, Yale, and we're really underrepresented. So we're at a disadvantage when we started already walking in that door. But we knew, can I say shit? We knew our shit. And and the attitude that we took was like, hey, if you don't invest in us, that's great, that's your loss, right? And in all honesty, investors are 99% wrong. Right? So,
sounds like a thumbnail quote right there. Investors are 99% wrong. And I know there's a few founders in here, so can we get some specifics? I know hard work, I know determination, knowing your numbers. How did you get some of those meetings? How did you turn some of those no's into yeses? Anything jump out as something to share?
Research, I would say, is a big. People underestimate, I think, the power of research, to be honest. Like, when we talk about the scale of research that we did, we were pulling through thousands of lists of VCs, and I would research, and Anthony would also research which specific ones would be most compatible. A lot of people, I think, underestimate how valuable that is because we really strategically zeroed in on who we wanted to talk to. So just like, it is in part a numbers game as well.
Yeah, and really, having that sales background, it's very helpful because, especially when you're raising capital, it like as Marissa said, it is a numbers game, but we really took it on a sales approach, right? We had a list of over 300. We narrowed it down to 100, and then we went to 50, and then we got the 10. It was that approach that we took, and having these conversations, having intros, and really talking to these investors and building a relationship. I think the other part of it is also, Marissa and I, we come from a place when we're, our thinking has always been, don't take but give, right? And even within our company and our culture, it's like, hey, our methodology around give first versus taking, I think really honed in on that, right? And you build those, cultivate those relationships. Too often founders look at it very transactional, and I don't think that's right. You should really look at building relationships, even investor or not. There's value in that, and how come and approach it from a place of how can I help you versus how do I take.
51% value, right? And so when you identified this list, you're 10 or 20, however many it was, what was your strategy? Were you able to get intros to most of them, or did you get some success with even cold outreach, or how did you go about that?
It wasn't mostly cold outreach. It was our network and really talking to the folks, right? I think predominantly the first round, the 1.2 million was around our network, angel investors, LOI Ventures, came into that. And then that got easier to our next round. We were raising $500,000 bridge, and we oversubscribed that bridge. It was just basically through our network. And the other thing is that we don't miss out on an opportunity. So we were out in, was it Memphis?
Yeah.
Yeah, Memphis. We were out in Memphis in a community conference, and we were supposed to return back. And I got in shit for this from my wife, by the way, so I paid a price for this. But essentially I was supposed to go back, and then I got a call from one of our advisors, and he's like, you better get your butt down to Miami, because Mark's group wants to talk to me. I'm like, who's Mark? Which Mark? He's like, Cuban, just get over here, right? I'm like, I gotta go back home, but I have to take this flight. So we took a flight, went out there, spent an extra 2 weeks, and then went back. But we never take an opportunity for granted. And I think that's the other thing, is like everything is an opportunity, and it also builds momentum. It also builds your luck, right? Like, it's a weird dynamic, of like how things come together. And if we didn't take that flight, and if I didn't go to Miami, we wouldn't have gotten investment from Mark Cuban.
Yeah. Now you can take as many vacations as you want. Your wife doesn't mind. Right?
No, she still gets it.
But I think so. I think that shows what you're willing to do. That energy then comes into the conversations. And one thing when it comes to getting your first strategic investors, did you find that once you had the names, that it got a lot easier going forward? Once you had or did that wasn't that as big?
Yeah. I think yes and no. It got easier in the sense that we had. It was the comms area is where we refined it a lot more, and that got easier as it went. It's like learning a new skill, right? Like when you go and seek investment, like you're floundering like with your comms, and then you see patterns and you recognize things while going through these meetings. That got easier, but we just got more and more confident because our numbers was backing it. Right, our customer pipeline was backing it. So, honestly, it was to a point where, we could do a slow growth, or we get fuel and we grow this to see our mission, right?
Right.
So our mission is that every company, regardless of their size, should have data and analytics, whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're for-profit or corporate, and we really want our software into every company that's building community. And we see this, and that we honed in on that mission when we talked to DCs, and we're like, look, we can grow this slowly, or we can really knock this out of the park, and this is what the total addressable market is, and this is where everything is going. Help us, and we can ride this rocket.
And during that journey, one of the valuation is always half voodoo, half numbers. You said you had some revenue, so then you start to have that bring. That's more of a proof of concept. Obviously, you're not doing a revenue multiple at this early stage in the journey. But can you kind of talk through your internal thought process on valuation, and then how that played against the investors that you talked to?
Yeah. So that's really interesting. Going back here. In terms of valuation, we compared it to what our market industry what was happening in the industry. As we were growing and building the company, we had two competitors that came into the space, and they gave us a baseline of what was happening in the market. We used that. Also, in terms of our valuation. In terms of growth and how we were growing, we used that as a benchmark as well. But there's always going to be pushback because the investors want good deals, right? Yeah. So they're going to be like, how did you get this evaluation? Yeah. And we're going to be like, okay, well, here's, again, be prepared going to these meetings. Well, this is where we see the industry. Yeah. This is what our competitors raised at. And this is where we see our value. And this is why we're better. Right. And this is where we'll capture the market better than them, right? And this is where we got our valuation from. And if you can back that up, then really it's a simple yes or no.
Right.
Like I agree with your valuation, but it's open to negotiations, right? If you really want that partnership,
Yep.
you're open to that negotiation. Like we spent a month negotiating with Mark's group on valuation, like and due diligence and valuation.
And at that point, so were they your first money in, or did you have to then back that valuation up to previous investors, or how did that
No,
play?
no, they like the previous investors. So basically, the previous investors came in on a valuation, and we were looking at a higher valuation for Mark,
Right.
and we had to back that up.
Got it.
Right.
Got it. And during those conversations, the numbers have to make sense, right?
Yeah.
And the projections have to make sense, but also, you always hear you back the jockey and not the horse. So if you sort of were to put those two on a measuring scale, what do you think? And being first-time founders plays into this as well. What do you think tipped the balance in your favor?
I think that our numbers.
Yeah.
I really think our revenue and numbers and knowing the industry really well, right? Like, even though I've exited 2 companies, I still consider myself as first-time founders in the tech space, right? So, like, in our case, it was, you come into this with, if I like for example, if I built WeWork and sold that would be a different story. You know what I mean? Or exited another tech company, it would be a different story. What plays a factor is that you've got the numbers to back up your valuation. I think all we're going into this era where, especially with the economy, I think VCs are looking at growth, and now they're circling back and being like, hey, you should really look at revenues, And it's funny because for us, we've always looked at it this way. Marissa and I had no choice but to look at it bootstrap and look at it from a purely revenue standpoint because it wasn't easy for us to fundraise. So we had to prove these guys wrong going into those meetings, right? So we always looked at it this way, and it's interesting now, the landscape of VCs changing the mindset that we've always said, yeah, this is how we're going to build a company. Very similar to MailChimp, very similar to HubSpot, right? Like, because they did, and Calum did the same thing, right? Yeah.
It's definitely interesting, I think, for us too, because it's like, that was one thing, the market started to turn down, and Anthony and I were like, oh, that's inconvenient. But, we went through the pandemic, and that was okay.
Yeah.
And we also noticed a lot of companies that were focused on growth metrics, like you were mentioning earlier, they would come to us and be like, okay, so I have this audience on all these social platforms. Now, how do I convert that into my community? Because all of a sudden, their investors are telling them, like, well, you need to focus on revenues. And they were like, you told me to get people on the platform. And they're like, no, now you need to focus on revenues. So all of a sudden, the strategies have changed for them. And that's a community question at the end of the day, because they just have to go back to their customers, the people who came onto the tools, and ask, okay, what's it going to take for you to actually convert to a sale now? So it's great to push growth, but at the end of the day, are they actually going to convert? That's the exact question that we address. And so it's been interesting for us to see the shift. Community was a buzzword, and there's lots of education, but we've also seen a lot of interest on the feedback side because people need to understand how to increase their value add for their customers going into this downturn.
And with the downturn in the economy and with the pandemic, that actually is not a bad thing for you, right? Because the way that's evolved community is basically evolved it into what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, we saw the shift after the first, the pandemic hit, and community grew stronger, and I think this is going to hit, and community, once again, is probably going to grow stronger, so.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are going to, like, we've already seen that shift. A lot of companies are trying to leverage community or try to figure out ways to build out their moat, right? And again, build out their ROI and why they're doing this, right? And community gives that leverage for these companies, and they know that, right? It's just tangibly how do they measure that? That was a real question, right? And another turning point for us, going back to fundraising, what was really interesting is that, with investors, I remember this meeting in Atlanta, a couple of meetings in Atlanta. These investors were turning us down, but then they were shifting and saying, like, hey, can we use your software? Because we have a portfolio of community companies that are in our portfolio. We have a community manager. And I sat there and I'm like, that's hilarious, because you're saying no to the investment, but you're giving me revenue. I'll take that all day long. right? So I'm like, I'm getting my, great, fantastic, you can be my customer, I don't care, like, sign up, here you go, right? So it was really funny at that moment. I was just like laughing,
It seems a lot of investors have very specific lanes that they're comfortable in, and if you deviate from that,
Yes.
Yes.
there's nothing to do with you. It's just.
And it makes sense though. That's their thesis, right? Like that's what they're predicated on, and it's not their fault. It's just that's what makes sense for them, and that's their area of expertise, and they need that. It keeps their investments.
You invest in what you know.
You invest in what you do, but yeah, and they also know more about the space, and that's part of how they operate.
Let's look at the Tampa Bay landscape. You've got a lot of the investors you mentioned were Miami, you're in Atlanta, you're up north, and you did mention Tampa Bay Ventures. I know you were at Tampa Bay Wave, and they got you some great connections. You also connected with Embark as well. So, what's been your experience locally with raising and growing in Tampa Bay?
Yeah, we see a huge opportunity here locally. I think, there's tons of growth, and that's one of the reasons why we chose to be here in St. Pete, is the communities, you can see the community coming together, right? Florida Funders just closed their round. They've got there's an opportunity there. There's Tampa Bay Ventures, so it's really up and coming in an area, and then being close quarters to Miami. But we love St. Pete and we love the Tampa Bay area because of the community, right? We want to be in a place where we're building a community company, but also be in a place where they understand what we're trying to do. And honestly, we just came here and we fell in love, and I've seen tons of potential and opportunities here. And you need founders coming in and building that community sense of community here, right? And we see a lot of talent as well coming in.
That's great. And startup life. So you said you've had those couple of exits. So I'm gonna hit this one, direct this one to Marissa first. Talk about startup life and the grind and 100-hour weeks, and how's it been so far? What's been what you expected?
I love it. I'm not even sarcastic about it. I genuinely, honestly, my friends, I have gone a little off the grid with friends and family just because things have been so crazy, but they always say like, wow, you work so many hours, and I'm like, well, but it doesn't feel like work to me though, because it's not work to me, what we do every day, and I absolutely love it. It was also not a huge shift for me because I grinded a lot while I was in school, and I went right from school to this, and so to me, staying up all night, that's just exam sessions, but it's just that, but prolonged amounts of time. So there's a lot more caffeine involved now, there's a lot more coffee. But for the most part, I absolutely love it, and I think we're both fueled by the mission and the vision, and it powers us every single day. And then our team, too. Honestly, I work very closely with the team, Anthony works very closely with the team, and it fuels you to watch, the people that you hired. One of them pitched something to Anthony yesterday, and they did a whole little slide deck, and I was like, wow, that's why we do it. So yeah, I love it. The startup life we live a very interesting life, though. It's very ingrained in what we do. Yeah. So, to a point where even if one of us is on vacation, I'll take calls. So I went to Paris recently with some friends of mine, and, they knew the rule was, if Marissa has a call, we will stop at a cafe and do something, or, I figured out a way to get international data, and I still take calls. I will do that. It's ingrained. It's just natural, and that's fine. You incorporate the work into your life. That's the way that, I manage to do it, and that's the way that Anthony runs things as well. So we never quite let anything like that stop us, but we love it.
And how did you first connect?
I'll let Anthony tell that story.
Yeah. So it goes back to where we first started. So about 2.5, 3 years ago, so I was working at IBM and came home. My son at the time was like, he was 4.5, and he was like, Dad, why do you go to work? And I was like, I looked at it and I'm like, yeah, why do I go to work? Aside from paying my, the bills and putting a roof on over our heads, and it just felt hollow, you know what I mean? And then I talked to my wife and I'm like, I'm gonna quit my job, and then quit my job, and then I was like, I'm gonna quit my job. I really can't I need to do something that was more meaningful and had an impact. And don't get me wrong, well-paying job, it's just the corporate life. It's just something about it, right? I can't go back to corporate. And then took up a co-working space. Partnered with the university, and then that's how I met Marissa at an accelerator. Marissa and I, in Canada, people were, we were talking about communities. Granted, our comms was not as polished, but people were looking at me like I was from a different planet. And then when I met Marissa, and I'm like, you build communities? You understand what I'm talking about? What? And then it just quickly went from there, and she's like, yeah, and I understand what you're saying, and I get you, and I'm like, someone gets me, like they get me, and I'm like, so what about community? And then that's where it went from there.
Yeah, pretty much the same from my perspective. I've worked for a number of nonprofits. Every summer I would run volunteer initiatives, and I was running one for cystic fibrosis when the pandemic hit. And so all of the events and all the programming that I was accustomed to doing in person had to be shifted to online. And that's when I started doing research into the community space as a strategy, because I figured, okay, you could get like permanent sources of I was even looking at subscription models at that point. And so I was kind of in the height of all this research when I started working for an accelerator program, and I was running the same types of programs and events. And again, I shifted to an online sort of community strategy. But I had a really hard time showcasing how that was valuable. So lo and behold, it kind of came to a crux when, the team was like, well, we're going to have to cut the community program. I was like, you can't cut me on your lead gen. And they were like, well, we can't show ROI and we're government funded. And so as this was all going down, they were like, have you spoken to this founder? Because he's going through this program and he's solving a problem similar to what you're experiencing right now. And so, we met up, and I've been with the team ever since.
That's amazing. And then during the program, then, was the idea of a data platform were you already on that, or did that come after you two met?
I think the data platform was already there. I think the shift was from the university student, because we were looking at it from a B2C realm on communities, and we realized quickly that this is a B2B problem, right? And that's where the shift happened. Was that it's interesting. Our mission stayed the same. Like we're here to help organizations build communities, but it was a shift from consumer to business, which was really interesting, because we realized that the consumer is the outcome, versus the businesses are the ones that are willing to pay and have this deep problem around the data that they need to solve internally to make those decisions.
That's great. Want to do a few questions?
I think we should do a few questions. Are you guys good with that? Would you like to ask a couple of questions?
Anybody have anything jumping out at them that we haven't hit so far?
Yeah, Maria.
So going back to the whole thing about getting investors, I've had some people approach me, but I always get very nervous with it because I don't know enough about it to kind of have those conversations and look at those documents. So how did you prepare yourself to have those conversations so that you could really vouch for yourself throughout those transactions?
There's a great book called Venture Deals. You should read it.
Yeah. I think there's a bunch of books out there, but also if you're talking about the legal jargon, I would go through what helped us was the Tampa Bay Wave, and really Dr. Richard Manassi, Linda Olson. They really helped us look through these documents and highlight that. But in terms of having the conversation, it's a learnable skill, right? I think with everything, like entrepreneurship, the journey of entrepreneurship, it's not something that you can just read. You have to, it's more of a hands-on learning than anything else, right? So you have to go through these cycles of talking to people, getting these terms, and I'll tell you, when we started when we were in Canada. When we launched the university platform, we had intros to investors, and this is back in 2019. We had a term sheet from an investor. Everything looked great, signed, and I remember this distinctly because this would have killed our company. It was 75% of our round at the time at a valuation of 2 million Canadian. and that was a big deal for us. And we needed the money. But it turned out that, in September we signed, but we were banking on that. And this investor told us to go, and this is prior to Marissa coming in, this is prior to our move. But this investor told us to go, you've got a lead investor, go fundraise and do that, do your thing. So we did that, and then I had a bunch of angels, and it turned out that he didn't even have the funds ready. And everything felt like a house of cards. And that was a defining moment for me. I remember like that moment in the car. I felt like I let everybody down. And I told myself, I'll never do that again. Because, it's business at the end of the day, right? And we ended up going back to Canada after we closed our pre-seed round, after we got Mark Cuban, and I met the guy again. And what was interesting was that, there was closure at that point, right? And he's like, yeah, I was immature. It was my first time doing this, and I really, almost screwed you over. And I'm like, no, it was a valuable lesson for me. It's super valuable for us. So that really helped us, number one, figure out how we're going to survive, but number two, how do we not have that happen to us again, and go into these investor meetings, right? And look at it and really understand where their fund is at what stage it's at, what their thesis is at, and really do the due diligence on the investor, just more so than they do the due diligence on us. I don't know if that kind of helps.
I'm gonna add a little as well. It's a great story. I think it's also worth splitting the variables, so confidence and technical knowledge, and just examining them both individually, because a lot of times you can get one and not have enough of the other. They're not necessarily correlated in every situation, and they're not perfectly correlated. So you think that I get a little more technical knowledge about the investment process, that's going to equally bring my confidence up. But again, they're not. Sometimes one can be a different process than the other. And an amazing series is called How to Start Up. It's from Stanford MBA. I think Andreessen Horowitz put it on. They basically filmed their lectures. It's on YouTube. It's a few years old, but it's like a who's who. Peter Thiel, the guy that founded Airbnb, the Y Combinator people. Actually, maybe Y Combinator did it, but it's a 20-part series. Keith Rabois, I think he did number 4. It's just incredible on operations and stuff. But How to Start Up, I think, if you can find that on YouTube, is a must-watch for any property. Anybody else?
Okay, I'll readily admit I'm not a tech person, but so how, I hear data analytics, and I'm wondering why doesn't a company or a community get like a Tableau expert moving forward? But I guess I'm trying to understand your business model. Have you kept refining it, or have you had to pivot, or how did you get to, what your current product offering is now? Did you start really broad and find your niche really easily, or how did that evolve?
So how did we get to where we are now for our business? Is that the question?
From what your product offering is.
Yeah.
Did you start really broad and then narrow in, or did you really know where you wanted to go and pick your lane really early?
Well, I come from the sales background, so for me, I knew that there was a gap between marketing and sales. But I really it was really fortunate. So when I quit my job and took out that co-working space, I interviewed 300 people, and predominantly in my city in Canada, there's 4 universities, and predominantly the people that were interviewing were international students. And they were all saying the same thing. They were all saying, hey, I have a real hard time connecting to the campus community. I left my city, I left my country, and I looked at this and I'm like, this really sucks, because I'm an immigrant and I understand how this feels, and I understand the importance of community. So that really struck a chord for me, and I want to solve this problem. So I just picked up the phone, called the university and be like, do you know these students that pay you top dollar feel totally disengaged? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, I think you have a huge problem. Can I solve this for you? Can I help you solve it? And yeah, and they gave me an office in the room closet in the basement. And I was like, okay, cool. And then we launched our product, and that's how I met Marissa. And then we quickly realized that, you know, when we saw the pattern for the students, on Thursdays and Fridays and Saturdays it would skyrocket, and then it would just drop down. I'm like, this is not, this is not a consumer problem, because the businesses were coming up to us and asking us for data. So we were always refining it and asking questions, right? And then when we were like providing them with the data on the usage, on the engagement, they were coming up and saying, and this is when the pandemic hit, they were like, can you do the same thing for Zoom? Because now we're going to Zoom. And we're like, yeah, I think so. We can do that. And so we built it out on Zoom. And then, you know, we're always asking the question as to why. Then I looked at it and was like, hey, is this just a university problem, or is this do other organizations have the same problem? So I picked up the phone again and called, you know, my people in my network, in different companies, in different organizations, and we're like, hey, I'm seeing this at the university level. Do you experience the same problem? And they're like, yes, I would buy it if you can solve this, because, like you said, I have a data engineer, I'm paying for Tableau, and that department costs me close to $500,000. If you can save me $500,000, I will buy this from you. And I'm like, okay, there is a problem. And even then, we were not convinced. We were like, maybe this is a Canadian problem. And so we called up a U.S. company and got introduced to someone at SalesLoft, who ended up being one of our advisors. And she's like, oh my God, I'm building this on pivot tables. I can give you all the reports, can you build this? So it was, you know, over time, it became to what it was today, but we always ask the question why, and listen to the people that, you know, that were having this pain point and this problem, and making sure that, you know, this is a viable business.
And can you overlay that to your pricing and kind of talk about, because, you know, when you're B2C, you can do the $9 a month and have a bajillion people, but when you're B2B, you've got to really get your money from a much smaller pool. So how did your pricing strategy evolve?
We just took a quick and dirty approach, and we evaluated based on our competitors and based on the landscape, and did a quick analysis. I'll be honest, like, our pricing is going to change. Right? Like we haven't did segmentation yet. So the first test for us was to make sure that customers would pull out their credit card and pay us. So we looked at what the landscape was. We looked at models like Hootsuite, for example, Buffer, and we looked at these SaaS models, and we're like, okay, where do we sit and play? And then we were asking questions like, hey, if we model it per user per user per month, does that make sense? Do we need a free tier? And then the cost of conversion on the free tier. So we did some preliminary analysis. We're not even there yet in terms of our pricing, because I think pricing continuously evolves, right? Like even you know, when you look at these tools that they take quite some time within the next, you know, like 2-3 years to evolve that pricing and figure out that segmentation.
And it also feels like you're potentially evolving from a tool to a platform, whereas the pricing will change if you form spot-specific functions in tandem with other things versus when you can just be the thing, right? And if you can integrate enough and become ubiquitous enough that you can be the thing, exactly, that really jumps the price up, right? Exactly. Yeah. And so do you feel like you're at platform now, or still tools working the platform?
I think we're right now, we're tools working the platform. We'll get there. And that's our goal, is to get there, but we're constantly, I think the one thing is the one thing that's been consistent is that Marissa and I are always learning. We're always learning, and we're always talking to customers, and we're always talking to people, and we're always refining, right? And you know, whether it's the product, whether it's sales, whether it's investment, and that's what I love about this journey, is that there's never a moment where we're not learning. I think the minute we stop learning, I think that's when we stop enjoying it. But there's always something new. Like we just had a call. We just had a team call with our development team. At 6 o'clock, we were like figuring out how to be more efficient in our development lifecycle. How do we do releases? Build code, ship fast, right? Like that's the goal, right? We've had we've had startups that raise their, Series A and ask us like, man, you guys are so efficient, like how do you do it? Because we're always constantly improving. And I identify with, entrepreneurship with athletes, right? Athletes do this all the time. Like, Tom Brady is, even though if he wins, so many championships, he's always at the practice field. And that's the mentality. It's like you're always trying to be better, even if you win. I love it.
A lot of the businesses, as you talk about, seem to be larger businesses. Do you also offer this to like solo companies or people that are just starting out? Is that something that is also offered?
For sure, yeah. So another part of the mission and the vision of the company is every company across every community use case for every tool that they use. And so absolutely smaller companies. What we built the tool initially for was early stage communities because there seems to be in our space specifically a lot of focus on these massive communities. So, when we looked at it at first, there's obviously the success use cases. There's, you got your Notions, you have WordPress, all of those are very, they're massive communities of enterprise scale. But the early stages is like pushing a rock up a cliff. And how do you get that up there quicker, more efficiently? How do you scale up your interactions so that your members still feel appreciated, but you aren't pushing a rock up a cliff every day? And so the tool was actually initially built out to service early stage communities, and we've expanded to larger communities because there was an interest on the enterprise side when they realized that we were gaining analytics that enterprise communities weren't getting. So it evolved, but initially it was built out for that, and we still absolutely service a lot of nonprofit organizations, early stage startups, early stage community builders, creators. That's another big one because they have the same problem. They're also building a community.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you really emphasized the importance of networking early on, and I was just kind of curious if you could shed some light on how to effectively network, especially early on when you were getting started out.
Build a relationship, right? I think going back to that, I'm not going to build a relationship just on a transactional approach. I'm going to build a genuine relationship to know the person and take every opportunity, right? So, getting Mark was the end result of 2.5 years. To get into Tampa Bay Wave, I built a relationship with Dr. Manassi and Linda for over 2.5 years. The first application that we did, we got rejected. But I kept them updated every single quarter, every month. I'd ask them questions. But it wasn't through, it was just, for me, it was just intuitive that, like, you just build that relationship. And also, and people do business with people they trust. End of story, right? Like, hands down. Like, if they trust you, they will do business with you.
Sir.
So, you built a software company, and it was 50 minutes in before you mentioned developers. I'd like to know a little bit more about how you built that team.
That was a pain in the ass. So we got lucky being at IBM and seeing the ground level of how development cycle worked. Met with, again, similar to building relationships, right? Built a relationship with a colleague at IBM, and our lead engineers from Google and Amazon had a relationship with him. And then slowly started building out our team. Built a relationship with a recruiter, a technical recruiter in Tampa, right? And they, we grew our dev team from, what is this now? We went from 3 to 13 in a matter of 2 months. And now we're going, like, the scale we're going is crazy. But, like, I remember, like, it was just me and Marissa for so long, and now we're like we have people that report to us, and I'm in stand-up meetings, and
The game changes. The game changes.
People presenting
We
the game.
moved from startup mode into like people management mode, and it's a different.
Yeah, and I'm
that's a
like-
different game.
I'm like, oh God, this is more exhausting. Like, what's going on, right? People management's so exhausting.
What really blows your mind is when you have that first employee that you didn't even know got hired, right? That somebody else hired for their department,
Yeah.
and you're like, hey.
Yeah, like I can't.
That's gonna be a hard day.
It's gonna be a hard day, right? But like, it grew, and we also fired fast. Like some of the developers didn't work out, and I think it comes down to a cultural thing. And I think that's the thing that we really emphasize in our company is that there's a huge cultural fit, regardless of if you're a developer or you know a community manager or you know from it's the accountability goes from everybody, right? And that culture piece is really important for us. And we went through cycles of developers as well, but until we found like developers that understand what we, you know, that believe in the mission, number one, fit the culture, number two, and we really enjoy working together, and they really enjoy it, right? And it works both ways, right? Like, you know, it's not firing somebody, but it's also they fire us because we didn't meet up to their standards, right? So it comes down to building that relationship with developers. So it came from multiple sides in building our team. And I think the one super skill set that we're pretty good at is that we can within a week we know if this is going to fit or not.
Well, it's just refreshing to hear that you've got a software team instead of we've got the best team in El Salvador.
Right. Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah, I think we're good. So thank you for asking that question. I really appreciate that. That was my one question that I wanted to ask too. You know, you guys said that you're excited about being in this area because of the talent, right? And you know, everything that we do is all really, you know, all of our small businesses, we're all building out workforce, right? We're all trying to have that opportunity to bring somebody else on to take the journey with us. So you guys are, you know, here doing that along with us. Plus, I know you've got people kind of all over the country and probably in Canada too. But you know, when you are looking for those folks, what is it, you know, you said the culture thing, but what is it about your culture that you're saying, here's the one thing that we really want?
It's 3.
Okay.
Be kind, be keen, and be knowledgeable. That's what I tell people. So be kind, be respectful of others, be keen. We're a team of low-key keeners, just always. And that's the way that we've always operated. I am in a different way, Anthony is in a different way. And that's what we love about the team. And so, you know, it's that culture of excellence going above and beyond. And then be knowledgeable, just like know your shit at the end of the day, right? You can have a stance, we can have different opinions, but you have to be able to back that. Like, you have to know what you're talking about.
I think one investor asked me this question because of what our competition raised and how they were growing. And they asked us how we were going to be different. And I always make these sport references. I'm like, they're the New York Yankees with the payroll, and we're playing Moneyball. Right? I think that's what this area in the Tampa Bay region and the Rays, we punch above our weight class. And that's what really, that's how we look at a startup. Like, you know, people who want the opportunity but don't get that opportunity but will deliver, over exceed that. Those are hires. Like, I would much rather have someone that doesn't have the experience but will continuously learn, be engaged, versus someone who's 9 years senior who's just going to come in for the salary, right? And I think that's what we look for. Marissa says keeners. I call them high achievers, right? So, but yeah, we're playing Moneyball all day long.
All right, thank you so much for our first Startup Report Live.